to Of Light and Shadow Session 1. I'm so excited to welcome you to this series. I'm excited to welcome you to this first class. I want to give you an overview of what we're going to be talking about today in Session 1. In Session 1, what I've decided to do is really focus on Introduction to Shadow and all of the Jungian archetypes, both what are called the meta-archetypes and the sub-archetypes. That's going to lead us through 24 different archetypes or personality types, including light archetypes and shadow archetypes, to help you understand on a fundamental level what the core of your personality is, both the light aspect of your personality and what the corollary shadow aspect might be. In Session 2, what we're going to do is take everything I'm teaching you today, and we're going to overlay astrology and the Myers-Briggs inventory next time. And by the end of Session 2, so you need your 4-quadrant grid or your 4-quadrant canvas that we created. If you're going to use that, you need it for Session 2. So the nice thing is for today, for our first class, which by the way, I'm recording on the summer solstice. I mean, when you think about a class called Of Light and Shadow, which is all about sacred balance, really, because that's what we're talking about when we talk about shadow. We're talking about balance, the integration of all of the light parts of you, the easy to love parts, with all of the tricky, sticky, icky parts of you, right? The shadow parts, the harder to love parts. And part of what I think is so incredibly magical is to be recording this on the day of the summer solstice, when day and night are literally equal, right? We have equal hours of daylight today and nighttime, right? That's what solstice means. It's sol sistere, sun standing in center sky, and in the balance, light and shadow find their way to integration. And so I'm so pleased to have you here. I'm so pleased to be recording this incredible course on this incredible day. All of the energy is just right. I will tell you, even as I was preparing to come and record this class for you, which by the way, I asked online just for feedback about what questions were on people's mind who had signed up. And I'm going to try to address almost all of those questions today. So I'm really hoping that you're going to find this first session informative, really action-packed, information-packed, and that even today's session, because each one of the classes is going to turn the dial for you just a little bit. Each one of the classes is going to, my intention anyway, is that it will give you some key to unlock some door to better understand who you are. And not just who you are, but you know what your primary desires and challenges are, because that's what your light and shadow ultimately teach you. I've got so much information to share with you today. It is an information-packed session. If you are a note taker, you should consider taking notes. I want to tell you that I designed a journal for you. It's actually in the Sage Goddess shop on sagegoddess.com. I designed it for your shadow work. This is the Hunab Ku, which is considered to be a portal. It also balances light and shadow. In the Hunab Ku, you have 2 of the dark antenna and 2 of the light antenna. This is a shadow portal, and so we custom created this Sage Goddess journal for you. It's all lined. It holds your pen. It has the elastic, the way those of us who love notebooks, love a notebook with nice elastic to close it. So I've got my notebook. It also comes with smudge for you and some tea lights. So that's a fun little class bonus extra, not required, but since I know a lot of you like to take notes, I thought you would love having all of your notes in one place that's really designed with the energy of the shadow work that we're doing. So enjoy that. That's in the shop for you. Okay, you are going to see me looking at my notes just because I want to make sure I cover everything that I have researched and gathered and compiled for you. A couple of things just to let you know off the top. This model that I've created of light and shadow, or OLAS, or OLAS as we're calling it, you can call it whatever you want. This model is something that I created. I used to be an executive coach, and I used to train Fortune 50 executives. I used to go in and do organizational development work with them, and I worked across functional areas. I used to do work in HR and in finance, and so I would go in and try to help people better understand themselves and their organizations, to see what was causing their challenges, systemic challenges, and how they could approach it from a more organized perspective. So I used to teach the Myers-Briggs inventory. I used to teach about archetypes. We would give them different names, in management work, but fundamentally it's the same concept. What's new about this, and what I've never done before, is overlay all of the metaphysical information and correspondences. I've never tied all of this to Pluto and to one's moon position and to North and South Node. I've never really plotted all of this on the sacred medicine wheel and looked at it from an elemental perspective. All of this I created for you. This is my framework. And so what I hope is you really enjoy it. You're not going to find this information in this way anywhere else. You'll find the MBTI, right, the Myers-Briggs type inventory. You'll find, the medicine wheel, but you're not going to find this. And so I hope that the framework alone is a powerful tool, something you feel like, wow, I'm walking away with a whole new way to understand who I am. And it's not just you. What I hope is that you walk away with an understanding of who you are in the context of the constellation of your soul family. You didn't come into this life by yourself. We talk about this all the time. You incarnated with a whole group of souls who said, yes, I want to go with her. I want to go with him. I want to support him. I want to help her. And most likely your entire tribe is in a similar quadrant to you. That's what you'll hopefully find. I think that's what you'll find next time. It turns out that my entire product team, all of the senior management of Sage Goddess, my entire family, both nuclear and extended, are all in the Western quadrant. Now, you might say, wow, that's really incredible. Or you might say, you know what, it makes sense. Birds of a feather flock together. And I think what you'll find is that the quadrants all have really rich information to share with you. What quadrant you're in tells an entire story, right? There's an entire scene that unfolds. And so next time, not only are we going to overlay the MBTI profiles and all of your astrological information and the medicine wheel information, but we're also going to be looking at how each one of those quadrants works in the world, how they operate, what their primary motives are. I'm going to give you a quadrant analysis. And so that's going to be coming to you in a PDF ahead of session 2. And then in session 2, we're going to be going through all that information. So sessions 1 and 2 are power-packed, information-packed. Just stay with me. And in the group and in our debrief, because we're going to have a once monthly live debrief in our private Facebook groups, that's where you can ask additional questions. Of course, you can ask questions every day in a Facebook group, and I'll be there to answer those too. But I want to make sure you know that there is going to be a focused discussion coming up, and that's going to be the place for you to say, hey, can you explain more about that? Or hey, when you were talking about the northern quadrant, this was unclear to me. That's where I can go back and really fill in some of the finer details that might get overlooked in a 90-minute session, but won't get overlooked when we have our live conversation. Okay. What I want to do is set the stage for you now. So for the next few minutes, you can take notes or you can just listen. The next few minutes are really about what do you need to do and think about to prepare for this class. As with all ritual work, sacred work, spiritual work, you want to create a container. You want to have the right context. You want to be thinking in alignment with the work that you're going to be doing. So I want to share some of my sort of thoughts with you on how best to prepare for the work that we're doing today. And so you might consider this a course protocol for OLAS. And what I'm going to tell you is remember these things, refresh these things in your mind before each session, because they're not going to become irrelevant. Everything I'm about to tell you applies today, but it's going to apply to session 2, it's going to apply to session 5, and it's going to apply to session 6. So just as we go through the whole course, just be mindful. These are sort of refrains, right? These are melodies that are going to keep playing as we go through this experience together. You don't have any prerequisites to be here, but the number one thing I do want to tell you is, and to some extent it is a prerequisite, you have to be able to be comfortable with ambiguity. A lot of what we do here is going to be very ambiguous. I'm not going to be able to fix all of your shadow dilemmas in the course of one session. And the community that's gathering here, all of your peers are doing this work too. So the number one thing I want to tell you is there are going to be times when you are excited and times when you're scared. And there's going to be times when you are confident and there's going to be times when you're insecure. And there's going to be times when you're going to feel like you want to be very active in the Facebook group, and then times when you're going to want to, just sort of burrow in and be more solitary. And all of that is okay. My motto with this class, and honestly with life in general, is all is welcome here. And whatever you need and however you choose to engage. But we are going to talk about some do's and don'ts because I think it's really important for you to consider. A lot of us, especially 3D folks, you guys are more spiritually advanced and developed, and so I probably don't need to say this as much to you as I might need to say it to somebody who hasn't been through a lot of spiritual work, but you have to be in this space really willing to sit with the both and rather than an either or. We're not going to talk about light and then shadow and keep them all separate. It's a constant, think of the infinity symbol. It's light, shadow, light, shadow. There's a dance that happens. So try not to put your thoughts, try not to put this work into big buckets. I think the more, and that's part of being, tolerant of ambiguity, but I think the more you can consider that it's not an either or, it is a both and that there's real complexity here that's going to take you time to unpack. I think I mentioned this in the preview to you, but it's worth saying again that I had considered doing this class in a 6-week program. And when I really looked at it, I thought, you know what, that's not enough time for integration of what we're doing. It's got to be slow and a little syrupy, it has to be, we have to allow these concepts to marinate, right? And you have to be able to marinate with them and in them in order for them to take hold and really be effective for you. Okay, the number one thing that I want you to consider is how you ground your energy. And we're going to do a little exercise right now together that I hope you will enjoy. And again, this is another one where I want you to consider doing this exercise every time we have a class. We may not do it together in class, but maybe you save 5 minutes ahead of each time you watch a session and you just do this beautiful grounding tree of life meditation. It's a really simple one, but it's very effective. And if you've never done it before, usually the first time feels pretty profound because you're thinking, wow, I've never anchored my energy into the ground this way. And if you're a visual person, a tactile person, this gives you a really vibrant metaphor for thinking about how your energy works and how you can anchor it before you begin ritual or ceremonial work or even coursework like this, especially when it's spiritual in nature. So I want you to get really comfortable in your chair. I'm going to get really comfortable in my chair too. And I want you to bring your awareness to your hips. Get myself back in focus for you here. Bring your awareness to your hips. And I want you to imagine that extending from your hips, out of your hips directly, is a tree trunk. And it's the exact dimension of your hips. Same width, right? Everything about the dimension of your hips is exactly the dimension of that tree trunk. Almost imagine that you're sitting on the trunk of a tree. But become part of the trunk of the tree. Feel yourself connect to the wood, right? Really imagine that you and the trunk of the tree that you're sitting on are one continuous piece, one continuous form. And feel, really surrender to that tree trunk. Let yourself get into the experience of this, because the more crystalline you can make this vision, right? The more alive you can make this experience, the more potential you have to really ground the energy that you're working with. So really becoming aware of that trunk of that tree. And now I want you to, beginning at the top of your head at your crown, I want you to imagine pouring light energy from each one of your chakras down your central column. Imagine it as your spine. That's where all of your chakras are held. I want you to imagine pouring that light energy from each chakra down your central column and into the trunk of that tree. So let's begin at the crown chakra, beautiful bright violet light. That's all of your spirit connection, your spiritual development and advancement. And let's imagine taking all of that beautiful spiritual nourishment and energy, turning it into a beautiful flowing violet stream of light. And let's send that down our central column, down between our hips and down into the trunk of that tree. And then going to our third eye, which is a beautiful indigo. It's your center of inner knowing. It's the seat of your inner oracle. Let's gather up beautiful indigo light, and let's pour that down the central column and into the trunk of the tree. Maybe take a nice deep breath between each of the visualizations of the chakras, just to really, again, just be crystallizing the vision for yourself. And then at your throat chakra, which is your seat of truth, your ability to articulate your truth and what you need, let's imagine gathering up that beautiful light blue light, that light of truth, and let's send that down the central column. And then at the heart chakra, let's gather up beautiful green light of love and compassion and healing, and let's send that beautiful green light down that central column. And then at the solar plexus, gathering up all that beautiful golden light of personal will, strength, power, and send that beautiful golden light down the central column. At the sacral chakra, it's your center of creativity and passion and creation. Let's gather up that beautiful orange, glowing orange light, and let's send that down the central column. Just continuing, imagining that flow of light just moving so smoothly up and down and through your own chakras and down into that beautiful tree trunk. And then last but not least, that root chakra, imagine that brown, dark brown, red, black light that emanates from your center of safety. And let's also anchor that light flow down through the central channel and into that tree trunk. And now imagine that it becomes like a fountain where the energy is flowing into that tree trunk and back up and back down and down through that tree trunk, up through the roots of the earth, up above the earth to your crown, and then flowing back down through that central channel. And in this way, you become truly part of that wheel of energy that keeps flowing. You become the fountain itself. And this is how you create flow. This is how you create flow in your body. This is how you create flow in your life. Flow in your life feels just like this. It feels like everything's open, everything's moving. You're not having to push that river. That river is pushing itself. And so just enjoy this for a moment. Enjoy being in this beautiful fountain of energy that is such a nourishing flow of possibility for you. And now I want you to imagine, especially for visuals, it'll be really easy for you. I want you to imagine that all of those colors of light begin to meld together in this beautiful liquid rainbow of energetic light. Imagine them flowing down into that tree trunk, down through the roots of that tree, down past layers of bedrock and the mineral and crystalline grid of our planet, and down past layers of rock and time. And it's flowing, that purple flowing light energy for spirit, and that dark indigo flowing light energy for your inner knowing, and that beautiful blue light energy flowing for your truth. And then that beautiful green energy flowing for love and compassion, that golden energy flowing for your power, that orange, beautiful orange energy flowing for your creativity and your passion. And then last but not least, that beautiful red, black, sort of brown energy flowing for your safety, right? Everything's flowing. And I want you to imagine pushing as much of that light energy down to the very center of the earth as you can. And imagine sending it as far down as you can, and then anchor it. Whether you visualize it as an actual anchor, whether you visualize it like a cat's tail sort of looping in, down, and into the earth, but I want you to anchor or tie it off and really feel the connection between the light energy from your field and Earth's ability, Gaia's ability to anchor it for you, keeping you steady and stable. It's good if you can put both of your feet on the ground when you do this exercise. I always cross my legs, but just for a moment, uncrossing my legs to really put that energy down and anchor it there. But now I want you to extend your arms up and imagine that they are the limbs of this beautiful tree, this tree of life, because this is truly what you've created by imagining this energy flow. It's a tree of life. It's a tree of your life. So I want you to imagine extending your branches out, gathering up all of that beautiful energy from all of your field, right? To the north, to the south, to the east, to the west, just gathering almost like antenna, pulling in all of the energy in your field, just sweeping your energy for beautiful, bright light energy. And now also bring that in and send that down the central channel. Just anchoring everything. We're anchoring your entire energetic field right now. Tethering, connecting, holding. Keep your arms out if that feels good. It feels right to me right now. And great spirit guides of this shadow work that we are doing, we give thanks for the protection, the guidance to anchor ourselves into this moment, to connect our own beautiful, vibrant light flow down into Gaia's deep, deep roots, into her bedrock and her layers of rock and time and bone. Recognizing that in this way we connect our own energy. We give ourselves a stable platform and foundation from which to build and explore and expand, to do this work together in a safe, good way. We give thanks for your protection. We ask that you guide and keep us safe and protect us all the way through this beautiful 6-month process, giving thanks for every soul who has been called in this direction to do this work at this place and in this time with me and with each other. We just give thanks. Amen, aho, and so it is. Amen, aho, and so it is. And so you are anchored. How do you feel? Do you feel a little bit more connected to the earth? Do you feel like your roots are somehow more able to find their way down to the center of Gaia's belly. You know, I think that's the goal of a lot of us, because we spend so much time in our upper chakras that they're always open and flowing, but we need to find a way back to an anchor, to some place that feels safe and tight and connected, and that can really, really hold us. One of the things I hear empaths say a lot is, I wish I could find someone or something that can hold me. It's a very common statement that you hear empaths make, and I think it's because a lot of us feel like we can't be held. You know, we're too loud, we're too needy, we're too sensitive, we're too demanding, you know, we're difficult, right? We've been told that, a lot of us, our whole lives. And so part of shadow work too is recognizing that you can hold yourself. You don't have to find some other person to be able to hold you. You can actually do that sacred work for yourself. And just enjoying that grounding that we just did, because for a lot of you, you haven't done a grounding exercise in a long time, and I just felt really called. It was really funny. My spirit guides were very clear that we had to do that Tree of Life meditation, so I hope you enjoyed that one. Okay, a few more things I want to tell you. This work requires you to strengthen your core. And you may want to consider strengthening not just your emotional, your spiritual core, but your physical core as well. Your entire digestive tract is part of your core. So I would advise you to try and eat clean for the next 6 months, right? Nourish your body from the inside out. We've talked a lot about sovereignty and what it means to feed yourself in a way that's in alignment with being sovereign. And so mind what you're eating, mind how you're speaking to yourself, and also mind the physical strength of your core. Some people, when they're doing shadow work, even advise doing Pilates and doing exercises to strengthen the muscles of the core itself, because believe it or not, it's all connected. Your physical core is connected to your emotional core, is connected to your spiritual core. And so the more you can do to really make sure that this part of your body is strengthened. It's interesting too, because empaths, when they're not strengthened in the core, tend to carry their weight right here. And so you may find that in doing this work and really strengthening your core and prioritizing that you actually start to lose weight right here. The other thing that causes weight gain around the middle is adrenal fatigue. And so I think doing this work sometimes can bring you a whole new renewed wave of energy. Because if you're not putting so much energy toward anger anymore, if you're not putting so much energy towards secrecy anymore, if you're not putting so much energy toward fear anymore, then all of a sudden you have a surplus of energy to put toward more productive uses. And so I want to encourage you to really think about the ways in which this class might open up a new door for you to have access to new energy streams. And then, you know, be really intentional about how you're going to use that energy, what energy streams you would like to call in. You know, so as we release fear, what do you want to put in fear's place? As we release anxiety, as we release hatred, as we release resentment, as we release jealousy, what do you want to bring in, again, to balance, right? Like, how do you want to create a stronger balance? And I think part of what we have to realize too is every shadow has a positive and a negative, right? Anger can be a very negative, destructive emotion, but there are positive aspects to anger. Anger can create a creative expression. Anger can manifest in the form of art. And so part of what we're going to be doing is not just removing and replacing, but trying to excavate and see if we can mine some of those darker shadow emotions for the beauty, for the glitter, for the diamonds that are hidden within them. And so we may dust off some shadow emotions and just kind of polish them up and keep using them, maybe reframe how we see them, because hidden a lot of times in our deepest shadows are some of our most beautiful gifts. Okay, the next thing I want to tell you is locate your support network. Really think about who's going to help you on this journey. It's really important to have people who know that you are doing this work. Of course, you're going to have me, and you're going to have your hive, and you're going to have everybody in the group to support you. But I think it's good too if your partner in life, if you have a partner or good friends around you, maybe you have your parents with you, anybody who can sort of support you, at least in knowing that you're going through this, so that as things come up, you have not only people online to support and to talk to you, but maybe someone in your physical life too could be a source of support. Don't be afraid to ask for help, especially from us online, in interpreting what you see. Shadowland is symbolic. It's metaphoric. There's very little about the Shadowlands, as I like to call them, that are literal. Okay? And Shadowland likes to reveal itself to you in dream time. So you might go to sleep and have a dream that seems so bizarre, and you think to yourself, like, is that related to my shadow? Is that possible? A lot of times it is, and I have a lot of experience with shadow dream interpretation. A lot of us in the group do, so rely on us. Know that you can come and say, I had a dream last night, it had this in it, or it had a bear in it, or whatever came up in your dream. Because you're doing this work and because you have set the intention to open this container, it's very possible that you'll have experiences that might be outside of your domain of expertise. And so just know that we have built a community around you that's there for you to help you translate as well. Now, here are the ethics of shadow work. Are you ready? And I'm sure you probably are like, well, I assume that she would say something about this. I have to, because we're going to be doing this work together, and it's really important not to shadow all over other people. One of the most important things to keep in mind is that one of the ways people cope with shadow, and by cope I mean avoid, okay? One of the ways people avoid their shadow is through a very popular psychological concept called projection. And so projection, and you see projection a lot. It's funny, you even see a lot of projection online and in social media where here's how projection works. So you say, okay, well, I know I'm a very angry person, but I don't want to look at my anger because that would be hard and require me to do work. So I don't want to look at my stuff. Let's look at your stuff instead. Or I'm going to, instead of being willing to say and own that and say, yeah, you know what, I'm angry, or here's what I'm angry about, or whatever, what you do instead is you say, you're angry. And you need to look at your anger. Okay? This is what people who project and are avoiding their shadow do. So they're angry, but they look at you and they say, you really need to work on your anger management. And of course, all you are is a mirror, right? Because it's obvious that usually that person actually needs to work on the anger. And so even people who sign up for a class like this are at risk of projecting, what I like to say, shadowing all over other people. And so what you have to do is you have to commit to saying, every time I try to turn the mirror to somebody else, you're not doing this, or you're not looking at that, or you need to, or you should, or right? Every time you're shoulding all over people, you need to look and say, should I be doing that? If it's constantly, well, you need to look at your anger management, the question is, do they need to, or do you need to? So no projecting. We're going to be I will be pretty honest with you in the group. If I see you projecting, I'm going to stop and say, I think that's a projection, and I think you need to look at it. And so just because in service of really teaching you and supporting you, I can't not do that, right? I have to be in a space where I can say, okay, it's looking like this is your issue, but then you're projecting it onto this other person, and that may be an issue for them, but you always have to look. And one of the things that happens to empaths, that it happens with really good intentions. So if you do this, don't feel bad. We've all done it, okay? But it's a matter of taking responsibility for it and becoming aware, because when you know better, you do better. We like to give advice. I don't anymore, but I used to love to give advice, right? Because once you have your kind of spiritual awakening, then you're like, I got to tell everybody how to do everything, right? Like, now I know all the things. And you go, well, you shouldn't do that, and you should clear that, and you should stop that, and you're too angry. Blah, blah, blah. My rule is, don't give anybody advice unless they ask for it. And even then, like, really think about that. I have become so humble in my middle life, because I just don't feel like I know enough about everything for everyone to be able to guide them in any particular way. But man, people sure do have strong opinions. And if you're one of those, what I'm going to say is suspend your judgment just for the next few months. Suspend your judgment of you, suspend your judgment of me, and suspend your judgment of everybody else in the group. And recognize that being a judgy judgerman sometimes is a projection of shadow. And it's your unwillingness in many cases to look at your own stuff. And so it's much easier to go, instead of you saying, oh, I need to work on this, it's much easier to say, oh, Athena, you need to work on that. And so that's where empaths get in trouble. And then sometimes, and again with good intention, empaths will say, well, that's my intuition. It may well be your intuition, but you still have to check your intuition, because we're human, to make sure that your intuition isn't a formulation of a projection. Does that make sense? So it's a constant evaluation of where you are relative to what you're saying about or for other people. Because ultimately, you are responsible for what goes on both within yourself and outside of yourself too. I always say, you're responsible. Karma isn't just about what you do. You know what I mean? You can do one thing to one person, but then if that has a trickle effect, if that continues to affect other people, you are still responsible for all of that as well. That's where generational karma comes into play, because it could have been something that your great-grandfather did 200 or 300 years ago, and you're still feeling the effects of it. Think about war, think about battle that way. So one of the things, and you're going to hear me talk about this a lot, but one of the things you have to consider is, the shadow that you're sitting with today, and really consider the possibility of this, the shadow that you're sitting with today is probably an amalgam of your shadow, your parents' shadows, your broader nuclear family shadows, all the way down the line, great-grandmothers, great-grandfathers, back to relatives you don't even know, have never heard of. And because I believe that there are dimensions outside of space and time, I think it's really possible too that some of your shadow is from the future. That's some crazy shit, isn't it? But I really do think, and so, because people talk about past generational stuff, and I'm always like, yes, and that's very important, and that is part of your archaeology, right? That is part of what makes you who you are. But you are also your future selves. You are yourself next year. You are yourself 5 years from now. You are your children's children, right? Those are still of your line. And so I believe that energy continues to flow back and forth across dimensions, across generations, and even generations forward. So, and you're responsible for all of that. There's no getting off that train, okay? So some stuff, I'm telling you all this as protocol of setting up because some stuff may come up for you, right, in the course of this class where you're like, I don't think this is mine. You know what I mean? It could be anger, it could be sadness, it could be sorrow. We could be talking about something and all of a sudden you're in tears and you think to yourself, why is that? I don't feel particularly sad right now, or that doesn't seem like a relevant issue for me. And it's like, doesn't even have to be your stuff. It's interesting, isn't it? Okay. What else do I want to tell you? There's a really funny little quote or little saying that goes with shadow work that I've seen before, and you may have heard it before too. They call them the twins within your light and shadow. And so I'm giving you all these metaphors because I want you to begin to think about yourself as the amalgam of both, the union of both, just like you're divine masculine and divine feminine, and you don't walk around going, I'm just divine masculine or I'm just divine feminine. You always see yourself as the product of both. You have to begin to see your light and your shadow that way too. And it's funny, at this point in my life, I will tell you, and I'll be really curious to see if you feel this way too, I can look at myself and tell when I'm kind of in shadow. For me, because my shadow is more attractive than my light, more physically attractive than my light, I have found. She's got a little bit of a spark in her eye. When I'm too much in light and not acknowledging my shadow enough, not doing that dance with her, not acknowledging more of my subterranean, subconscious desires and needs and all of that, then I look different and a little bit kind of dull, like my skin isn't as bright, my eyes aren't as bright. And that's why I was telling you, there's real beauty in that shadow. You're never going to hear me just say, gotta get rid of the shadow, don't go over there, there's nothing to see over here. What I'm going to tell you is go right in there. If you have felt bored, if you have felt like, is this all there is? If you have felt like you're never going to get your sex drive back, if you have felt like, or maybe I have clients who have never had a sex drive, forget getting it back. I have clients in their 20s and 30s and 40s who tell me they've never had an orgasm. Shadow. Your shadow knows how to get you there. But you got to talk to her, talk to him first, and dialogue and work with those energies and allow those energies to rise. The Kundalini is a really great example of where shadow and light unite, truly. The Kundalini, which is your latent life force, it's really connected to creative and sexual expression. It rises within you like a snake. That's the form Kundalini energy takes as it rises up that Sushumna column, which is the central channel where your chakras live. The snake sort of rises as the Kundalini energy rises, and then it winds its way back down. We've done meditations with that before, if you remember. But anyway, the Kundalini is a really beautiful example of the union of the light and the shadow. And even the snake itself is a metaphor, right? We think of snakes as both good and evil, right? As sort of having the potential to cure and also to kill. And I think that is what I'm talking about with the twins within. And that's why I started this whole session by telling you, you're going to have to sit with ambiguity. There isn't, on a certain level, there's going to be no way for me to resolve or reconcile for you what you're about to experience. You're going to have to ultimately resolve and reconcile it for yourself. I am opening a door for you to walk through, and I'm here with my hand saying, hey, hold my hand, I'll be here. But this is work that you're going to have to do. You chose to take this on, and as with every kind of spiritual experience, once you say yes to it, the work begins. The work's already beginning for you. And the work isn't just you sitting here listening to me for 90 minutes or being in our Facebook group. The universe is going to start to work on you. As soon as you give permission, like, you know what, I'm ready to do this work, all of a sudden you're going to have lots of opportunities to practice. I think you're going to emerge from these 6 months more beautiful, more sexy, more inspired, more alive, more playful, more creative, and more youthful than you have ever felt. And I'm saying that because I feel like I have reverse aged, especially in the last 4 years that I've been doing intense journey work combined with shadow work. And so you could always decide to take your practice to the next level. We are going to do a meditation journey together later in the 6-month season. And so you will have a chance to do some of that work. But I promise you, doing this work is going to peel off the scales, smooth out the wrinkles. So if you're willing to do it, those are the rewards waiting for you. In fact, here are the gifts of the shadow. Are you ready to learn what the gifts of the shadow are? I identified 6 gifts of the shadow that I would like to talk to you about today. The first one is spiritual growth. If you want to evolve spiritually, and especially if you want to accelerate and fast track your spiritual development, there's no bypassing this step. There's no way out. There's no way to avoid it. There's no way not to do it. At least I haven't found it. And I have worked with a lot of people who have worked with a lot of people, and we have a lot of experience as a collective. I don't know anybody who said, you know what, I bypassed it, didn't have to do shadow work. At some point, everybody has to do it, and it's iterative. So you never get to a place where you're like, well, I'm all done with shadow work for this lifetime. I checked off that box, and now I will forever be integrated. It's like, if somebody said that to me, I would laugh. Because the reality is, you could get your feelings hurt today. It's in the afternoon here. By this evening, somebody could hurt my feelings. And that's going to be a point of trauma. And I'm going to have to go in and acknowledge what the lesson is there. Or someone may reject me, or someone may, who knows, right? We're human. We're in this human mortal coil, and we have very little control over a lot of our experiences, ostensibly, right? And so you don't know what's going to happen. So leave open the door to the possibility that you may have to come back and do certain parts of this work over again. And that is not to say that you're not doing a good job, and that's not to say that you're not developing well. It may actually be that one or more of these sessions is so important for you that you almost feel like, I have to do this twice, I have to watch this twice. Like that meditation we just did, you might say, well, you know what, I didn't ground it all, so I'm going to pause this, go back, and I'm going to do it one more time. And so give yourself the latitude to do that without judgment. Creativity lives in the shadow. You might find that you're more inspired to go back and get back to your artwork, or go back to your music or your singing. Sexual passion and desire, as well as intimacy and pleasure, all live in the shadow. A lot of it does anyway. And so you might find that your sex drive comes back or gets stronger. You might find that I've had a lot of clients conceive after doing shadow work, not realizing that they were experiencing infertility because of a shadow issue that had been unresolved. So the possibilities of what the gifts of the shadow are really unlimited for you. Physical transformation and weight loss, we've talked about this. Stronger and healthier relationships. A lot of people's partners really want them to do this work because they want them to stop projecting their stuff all over each other, right? They want to get to a point where they're not constantly being blamed for everything. When you're constantly blaming your partner for everything, that's like a ding, ding, ding sign that you have to do shadow work. Everything isn't everybody else's fault. You have to look at yourself too. And then release of codependent behaviors and patterns. I think codependency as a general rule, right, which really is supporting people in their own dysfunction. I think a lot of times that's a sign, if you're doing that or if somebody else is doing that, that there's shadow that hasn't been resolved. Once your shadow is resolved, you're going to be a lot less likely to be willing to take on other people's dysfunction. Because once you're liberated and you're free, you're not going to want to perpetuate other people's dysfunctional patterns. You're going to be like, look, wake up, take responsibility for what's going on, you know? If you're upset because you haven't had a job in 30 years, I think it's time for you to look at why that might be and what kind of shadow archetypes might be at play in your life that are undermining you or sabotaging you, so not only will you begin to recognize your own patterns, but you're going to be able to recognize them in other people and then be able to be a really effective coach. Those of you who are, energy workers and life coaches, which a lot of you, are different forms of that, Reiki masters and practitioners, massage therapists, and on and on. I think you're going to find that this is going to give you tools and a vocabulary for being able to help people through their problems in a more productive way. Okay, I'm going to come back to your questions, but I want to sort of finish our introduction here together. Okay, so I want to give you a definition of a shadow too. I'll give you about 10 more minutes of a good introduction, then we're going to jump right into the archetypes. One of the things you should know is that your shadow is what I call your saboteur. Your shadow is the one that has the capacity to sabotage your success. And that can be really hard because a lot of times people work so hard to get to a certain place in their life. And then when they sabotage it themselves, when they undermine it, right? They build something beautiful and then they don't put the effort toward making it succeed. Or they build something beautiful and then all of a sudden they do everything they can in their power, however subconsciously, to destroy it. And those kinds of patterns are another symptom that the shadow isn't being addressed. So let's define the shadow this way. Are you ready? Here's my definition of the shadow, which is basically anchoring on or piggybacking on Jung's definition. It is unconscious facets of the personality that the ego denies, represses, or ignores. Let me say that again. The shadow is the accumulation of unconscious facets of personality, and that can be personal or collective. It can be your personality or it can be the collective personality. Because remember, the planet has a shadow, our country has a shadow, right? The universe has a shadow. These are things that the ego denies, represses, or ignores. And these can include very primordial images and energies. For example, if, like I said earlier, if there's war in your line somewhere, if there's been murder or any kind of global crisis or disaster of any kind, that's all imprinted in the material DNA strand and in the spiritual DNA strand too. And so all of that is part of your subconscious. And all of those events, by the way, on our planet are part of the collective subconscious. And so that this work, shadow work, in so many ways is really shamanic because it's about recognizing root causes, including old causes, karmic causes of current challenges, dilemmas, and traumas. Okay. And one of the things that Jung said, just to give you the last little bit of sort of Jungian background, he called it the unknown dark side, by the way, your shadow. And one of the things he said, that the early theories of personality said that everybody comes into this life a blank slate, what they call the tabula rasa, okay? It's a blank tablet. And then through life experiences and through your own family and everything, you know, wisdom, information, patterns get printed on this tablet. But it starts out blank. And Jung said, absolutely not. We are not a tabula rasa. We don't come into this life blank. We come into it preloaded with all kinds of primordial experiences and images, patterning. And that's why he compared the human psyche to a crystal. He said, just like crystals have an innate structure, right? An octagonal crystal doesn't have to be told to grow in octagonal form. It automatically knows. It has a basic structure. But there are other parts of that crystal growth that are subject to the environment, the temperature in which that crystal grows, the amount of time it's allowed to grow, the other crystals that are growing in that environment too. And so it's nature, nurture, but it's not just nature. And so that's important for you to know too. You have to begin to claim, and this is a tricky part too, karmic challenges, betrayals that have happened in your line long before, in many cases, you ever were conceived. And part of that is you don't have to claim them. I don't mean take them on as your own, but you do have to recognize that they are there and that you may unpack in that shadow suitcase I've been talking about, you know, because all of your shadow stuff, when you repress it, goes into a suitcase and then you zip it up and put it in the closet and pretend like it doesn't exist, except all that stuff is banging around in there. You know what I mean? You can hear some people's shadow suitcases from a mile away. And so what you have to know is that you have stuff in there that you may not even know about yet. And so as you unpack it, be gentle with yourself, but recognize that you may see, you may experience, you may come to know on an intellectual level, on a psychic level, on a somatic, a body level, things about your family and your past that might even surprise you, that might scare you, to my point earlier, that might upset you in the moment. Sit with everything as it comes and recognize that you are unearthing all of this right now for a reason. I don't know what that reason is. You may not know what that reason is. My guess is that reason is all the generations ahead of you to come. They're probably all on the sidelines going, thank you for finally, you know what I mean? Like grandma pushed everything down, grandpa pushed everything down, so did her mom and her grandma and their moms and their grandmas, and you're finally going to be the one who's going to do the work. Okay. There is, Jung drew a distinction between the personal shadow and the transpersonal shadow. So let me speak to that for just a second too. The personal shadow is your individual shadow, and like I said, it's an amalgam. It's a combination of everything that's happened to you in this lifetime, including lots of past life stuff that you may not even be familiar with, as well as what will happen down the line. Think of the Akashic records. Your shadow is all documented there, past, present, future, and you're able to access it, especially in a spiritual context like this. You're able to access it from all those levels. That's the personal shadow. There is a collective shadow, known as the transpersonal shadow. And that, in many cases, in fact, a lot of psychoanalysts have said that things like possession are actually just severe transpersonal shadow that doesn't belong to the individual, but somehow has nested in their own psyche. And so it's an interesting conversation, and we can look at all of those things. There are lots of developmental psychologists and psychoanalysts as well who will say that, figures of terror, whether you look at, dictators through history and people who have created massive destruction, they say are manifestations of the transpersonal shadow. And so it's important to note that that can actually take a form, that can have a destructive effect on the world. And so looking and being able to name things in that way, not just, oh, that's a bad person, but that person is representing a transpersonal shadow that goes above and beyond anyone's individual shadow and actually represents the deepest, darkest aspects of the collective unconscious. That's when you're getting into an interesting conversation. Okay. So we talked about projection. We've talked about dreams a little bit. In your journal, I would love for you to record your dreams. We can do some really fun dream analysis. In fact, if you're willing to record your dreams in your journal, I would love to do a fun little extra bonus, or we can include it in our monthly debrief where you guys share your dreams and we can all do some dream symbol interpretation, because I guarantee you your dreams are about to get really interesting. Your dream time is really the only place where your subconscious can communicate with you. I mean, unless you're extremely clairaudient and very good at hearing the sound of your own intuitive voice. For a lot of us, the only way our spirit guides can reach us and connect us with our deeper subconscious is during dream time. So record your dreams, record every symbol you see, every sound, every color, if songs come up in your dreams, they're all relevant for what we're going to be doing together. Okay, so now let's jump into the archetypes. Are you ready? So Jung identified 12 archetypes. So I'm going to give you his archetypes first. These are, of course, everything is light and shadow, but he considered these to be the primary sort of light archetypes. And then what I did is I took Jung's 12 light archetypes and I made a corollary shadow archetype for it. So I'm going to walk you through the 12 basic light archetypes and the 12 basic shadow archetypes. And what I want you to do as I walk you through them and sort of talk you through them is I want you to think about where you are in all of this, recognizing, by the way, that we're going to come back to all of these in session 2 as we combine them with Myers-Briggs, the astrology, the elemental pieces. And so today is just sort of step 1. And then at the end of session 2, you're going to have not only know exactly where you are and how all these things combine together, but you're going to have a full quadrant analysis to explain who you are and what your personality preferences and desires and needs and also your shadow manifestations might look like. Okay. So the first one that I want to think about with you is the first archetype called the innocent. And this archetype is all about, think of the Fool from the Major Arcana, okay? The innocent is, in our typology, aligned with the direction of East. And it's really about first steps into the world. It's an open perspective, the innocent archetype. And so for a lot of people in life, this can seem like the kind of person who's a younger soul, the innocent, and is willing to sort of meet life on life's terms. It's like open to new perspectives, open to new people, new experiences, new ideas. And so when you are activating this particular archetype, you are, think of it as being aligned with early dawn, right, in the day. It's like sunrise, and your arms are open wide if you're the innocent. And so this is a beautiful place to begin as an archetype, because there's so much possibility here. There's a lot of energy flowing with the innocent, because the innocent hasn't yet learned to be afraid. The innocent is embracing life on life's terms. And so let's actually talk about the shadow archetypes as we talk about the light, because you'll see sort of the balance and how they work together. They're very much yin and yang, how these archetypes, the light and shadow, nest together. When the innocent archetype devolves to shadow, when it fades to shadow, when it activates more of the deeper repressed subconscious, the innocent becomes the cynic. Okay, so whereas the innocent is the fool in the major arcana, first steps out on a beautiful journey, isn't sure who he's going to encounter or what he's going to find, the cynic is the exact opposite of that, and the darker aspect of that, which is, whereas the innocent says, I believe, I'm open to new experiences, the cynic says, there's nothing to believe in, right? The cynic has lost his or her faith. And so that shadow, and you can think about what that would mean to project that cynic shadow onto other people. Someone comes into your life and they're all innocent and they're excited and they want to teach you stuff and they're exploring life, right? They're open to new ideas, and you come along and go, I think we're good. Or that doesn't make any sense. Or you should do your homework first. Or you don't know what you're talking about. Or I already did that and it wasn't like that, right? That's a shadow too. If you constantly are going through your life just going, I can't with her, and I can't believe he said that, and that's just the dumbest thing, and super judgmental, right, the cynic. But the cynic is judgmental. Every shadow thinks it's right, okay? And the cynic is judgmental because they feel like, I've been there and I've done that. I am right. It is a dumb idea, But here's the thing. The shadow doesn't have the right, and this is, as we go back and forth, I want you to think about this. In your shadow aspect, you don't have the right to let your darkness obscure someone else's light. That's what projection looks like. Projection is your darkness obscuring someone else's light, and you don't have the right to do that. No one has the right to do that to you, right? So when the innocent comes along, or when you invoke the innocent within you, try to recognize that the cynic is the shadow counterpart. It's the dark side, the subconscious dark side to that aspect. And I want you to almost, for a moment, imagine a dialogue between the innocent and the cynic. Can you? Like, we sort of just did a little mock-up of that too. And then my question for you is, if you can imagine the dialogue, what would it take for you to roll back the cynic in you and become the innocent again? Activate the innocent again. And even more importantly, because once you answer that question, then you'll be able to answer the ultimate question, which is, how within you, if this is your archetype or one of your archetypes, how can the innocent and the cynic live together? It's a powerful question, isn't it? How can the innocent and the cynic work together? Maybe they balance each other. The cynic keeps the innocent safe, right? The cynic's like, don't do that, it might not be safe, don't trust that person, maybe you don't know, right? And the innocent's like, no, I want to trust, I want to go, I want to explore. It's almost like a child and a parent. Maybe you can imagine, maybe that's happened to you. I had a cynic parent. That was one of my parents' shadow archetypes, one of my mom's shadow archetypes. And it really kept me from developing a spirit of, I wouldn't say optimism, but it kept me from developing my own childlike innocence about the world. My mom at an early age was starting to teach me about things to get me to be a little bit more cynical so that I would be safe, right? So don't trust these people, don't go there, those people don't know what they're talking about, a lot of that, right? And she even sort of downplayed or talked in certain cases negatively about, certain faith traditions, and that may have happened to you too. And then as I get older, I'm having to unpack that and become the innocent again, like engage the beginner's mind. So I'm just giving you that as an example. Maybe that happened in your life, maybe it didn't. But even if this isn't your archetype, it's someone's archetype that you know, most likely. And so recognizing the patterns, even as I go through them, even if it's not directly an archetype that you're working with or that you have activated, I think it's still really worthwhile to consider how it might be operating in your life or in the life of someone that you know. The next archetype is the orphan in Jung's typology. And the orphan is alone. The orphan is what an orphan is. The orphan has lost its roots, its tethering. doesn't have sort of the basic needs met. And so that can be a beautiful thing in the sense that the orphan creates incredible resilience. When you feel like you are sort of a soul wanderer, right? This is your journey, and you're here to figure this out, and you're like the magician, right? Which is a different archetype. There is a magician archetype, but the orphan has a little bit of that energy. And so the orphan in our typology lives in the South because the orphan is a highly courageous archetype. The orphan is having to blaze its own path. It's having to blaze its own trail. That's one side of this, okay? And so the orphan looks at the orphan's life and say, I might have to do this alone, but I'm prepared to do it alone, and it's going to build within me a certain strength and resilience that's going to be a gift, right? That's the gift of that archetype, is the resilience and the strength and the independence that it nurtures. The shadow archetype of the orphan archetype moves us over to the victim. You can quickly go from saying, I'm in this, I've got to figure this out, I'm on my own, but I'm strong and resilient, to the victim archetype, which is one of the shadow archetypes, that says, I'm a victim because no one wanted me. I'm a victim because I'm alone. I can't make things happen because I don't have help. That is the shadow of the orphan. And again, with all shadow archetypes, you can imagine what it would be like to project that onto someone else, right? I'm alone and it's your fault, so you're the reason I'm a victim. Right? We attach our victimhood to someone else, and then we project all of the feelings and thoughts and experiences of that shadow onto that person, onto whoever it is that we have decided is responsible for our victimhood. And again, in certain cases, people are responsible. There are people who victimize others. And so I'm not suggesting that, that you just don't consider them and it doesn't take two to tango. But when you're doing this work really isn't about going back and even forgiving necessarily. This work is about integrating. This work is about recognizing where in your life these energies have emerged and what gifts they might have to offer you. If you have felt like a victim in your life, where might there be a gift for you in that feeling, in trying to reconcile and integrate that feeling? And I think part of it is compassion, right? It can generate huge amounts of compassion to feel your way into that victimhood space, to recognize that that's part of your shadow, and then to recognize that that can help you build the most sweet, beautiful compassion for other people who have also been in a victim position. But building that compassion, and it may require forgiveness on your part, building that compassion requires you to see it. And here's the other thing too. Sometimes these shadows, like the victim is case in point of this, sometimes these shadows earn you points, okay? Like if you're a victim, sometimes you get pity. And some people like that. And so in order to reconcile that shadow and work through it and integrate it and really make it productive, you're going to have to let go of the dysfunction of enjoying pity that you receive by living in that victim mentality. Let me tell you something right now. A queen is not a victim. She doesn't have time for it. A sovereign is not a victim. A sovereign never sees himself or herself as a victim. They always see themselves as someone with agency, someone who has the potential to transform their circumstances for the better. And so a victim perspective is a powerless perspective. All of the shadow perspectives, the cynic, that's a powerless perspective. It's a faithless perspective. I don't know a lot of really fulfilled cynics, do you? They tend to be pretty dark, pretty sad, and despondent people. And they will give you 10 different reasons for why that is. And sometimes they'll say that it's your fault. But the reality is, it's not a happy place to be. These shadow archetypes, the reason I always say you can't live in your shadow, it's super dark here. There's no sunlight in the shadow, right? And so it becomes this, it can really cultivate a sense of despondency and despair, right? I think despair, by the way, which is the ultimate lack of hope, I think that's one of the most dangerous emotions, especially for people who are vulnerable, right? And so we want to avoid despair. We want to find a way to integrate despair and find a way to transmute despair into a lighter vibrational emotion. Because at the end of the day, the point of integration is to raise the overall frequency. If your shadow is this much and your light is this much, your overall, let's reverse it. If your shadow is, here and your light is here, if you bring them together, you're creating sort of a balance in your own ecosystem. But too much shadow, right, leads to despair. Too much light and not enough shadow leads to, in many cases, an unfulfilling life too, because all of that light can be really, really beautiful. But if it's not anchored in a little bit of power and a little bit of creativity and a little bit of passion, it's really hard to find a way to manifest it, to materialize it, to bring your soul gifts forward in this world. So it's really about finding the balance, but you don't want to live in your shadow for very long. And then number 3 archetype from Jung is the hero, right? This is the one who saves the day. This is the one who's always at the right place at the right time. And again, the hero is a beautiful light archetype, right? We love the idea of a savior. In almost every major spiritual tradition, the hero archetype gets activated. We talk a lot about the hero's journey. A lot of us identify with this particular archetype. In our typology, the hero is in the East because he's beginning a new adventure. The shadow side of the hero is the villain. And that, I mean, hello, comes right out of Hollywood, right? You have the hero, you have the villain, you have the protagonist, you have the antagonist. The villain is where the hero is one who creates, or at least creates possibility and facilitates opportunity. The villain is one who destroys, and is there really to anchor what is a dark counterpoint to the protagonist or to the hero. And so this is a figure who undermines, a figure who counterbalances, a figure who tries to look for flaws and weaknesses in order to exploit those and undermine the integrity of whatever the hero creates. And again, you can imagine what it would mean to project your villain shadow onto someone else. And so you see people like this sometimes too. You see people who really fit all of these molds, but a lot of times it's people who almost seem to take pleasure in destroying other people's happiness. I know people like that. Do you? It's one of the worst shadow archetypes, because sometimes it just seems like they do it for sport. You know what I mean? It's like, and they'll look for heroes to undermine or to discredit or to, just for the sake of doing it. And I think one of the ways that we can balance that is by recognizing that no one really can live fully in the hero archetype, and no one can really live fully in the villain. We are all both. Just as we are all both of all of these things, there's a little bit of creator in us and a little bit of destroyer in us too. And the villain, by the way, can really be associated with a lot of jealousy, resentment, right? I don't have something, so I don't want you to have it either, so I'm going to destroy it, or I'm going to be the bad guy in your story, or whatever. It's hard for me to imagine, but because it's so much negative energy that you're calling into yourself when you behave like that, but there are people who do it, and that's why the archetypes exist. And number 4 is the caregiver archetype. This is the care provider. This is the really what we associate with the mother archetype to a certain extent. This is the one who's here to provide for your basic needs, make sure that you're nourished, that you're well looked after. And again, you see a lot of this in the spiritual community too, right? Wanting to take care of others, wanting to make sure that they have everything they need, wanting to support and encourage. The shadow of that, in my typology, the shadow archetypes is the dark mother. There's the light mother, the benevolent mother, right, who is always adoring of her children and supportive of her children. Then there's the dark mother, right? The mother who's capable of destruction, the mother who's capable of harming, right? I mean, that is the other side of that coin. It is the mother who can't love. It's the mother whose love is not unconditional. The mother who puts conditions on her love. And you can even think about that outside of parenting, right? The caregiver archetype isn't just a parental archetype. You see caregivers in all parts of our society, in all structures. And you see how that can get twisted into a dark caregiver in all settings too, right? People who take advantage of the fact that other people have needs, and that they're able to provide and support and offer, fulfillment of those needs, but at the same time can manipulate those and actually cause great harm. The caregiver archetype, by the way, resides in the West. Most of the maternal energy of the traditional medicine wheel is in the West. The water element is also in the West. Grandmother energy is in the West. The oceans, which are considered to be our mother, is in the West. Lunar energy tends to be in the West, and so that's why we place the caregiver there. Number 5, the next archetype is the explorer. This is the freedom lover. The explorer is going to go and look and find and hunt, and they're not going to take your word for it. They're going to go out there and they're going to see this world and they're going to explore their options and they're going to keep an open mind. The explorer is super courageous, super strong, not afraid of anything. In our typology, sits in the southern quadrant because that's all fire, and the explorer is like, let's go. I always think of the explorer archetype as having a backpack on and just a passport in hand and just ready to go and see the world. The shadow aspect, or the shadow archetype of the explorer, is the sheltered soul. You know, whereas the explorer is out there wanting to see it all, experience it all, consider it all, the sheltered soul is saying, I don't want to leave my house. I don't think it's safe out there in this world. I don't want to explore other options. I want to make sure that I'm safe and that my world stays very small. And so, and you can imagine what the projection of that onto others too, right? Like, you should stay where you are, you know, don't risk things, right? The sheltered soul, whereas the explorer is a huge risk taker. The sheltered soul is like, that could be dangerous. You don't know what could happen. What if you don't have what you need? And so I grew up with a lot of that shadow too, which, by the way, can be related to the victim, can be related to the dark mother, but a lot of that hyper protective, overprotective in the extreme is the shadow of the explorer archetype. All right, the rebel, number 6. The rebel is also in the south. Rebel is like, let's find a different way. It's almost just contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. Let's find a different way to do this. Let's find a different way to think about this. Let's go and test the limits. Let's go and see how far we can push this. Let's go and see. And you know, you're telling me to do A, I'm going to try B. And it's not a negative. This is not the shadow archetype. This is the light archetype. The rebel is here to switch things up, to shift the paradigm. And we need rebels, because if we didn't have anybody who was thinking in an alternative, contrarian way, we would really end up stuck with some patterns, both in the collective and personally, that didn't serve us for a very long time. Can you imagine if we never took risks? That can be dangerous too. Okay, the transition from the rebel to the shadow archetype, I'm calling the officer. You can also consider the general or the emperor, someone who is very much tied to following the letter of the law. Okay, so whereas the explorer is wanting to really get out there, the rebel, really wanting to consider other alternatives and see how they can push the limits and test the boundaries, the officer is like, no, this is the boundary. This is the law. This is the end of the road. There are no other options. You can't push against that, right? And so that's another shadow archetype. And it really makes it difficult, because the rebel is trying to find a different way to continue to innovate, because innovation is sort of the law of nature, right? Nature never rests. She's always trying to improve upon, you know, the physical health and well-being of a species. She's always trying to, you know, make sure that the best possible traits in a species survive and continue on. And so to have the hand put up and basically say, this is where it stops. This is the law. This is the letter of the law. You can't change it. You can't rebel against it. You can't do that. All that does to a rebellious spirit is contain it and stifle it. And so it can be a very harmful shadow archetype, especially if the person isn't aware that they're doing it. And again, this is one that I'm familiar with. It's been present a lot of different forms in my life, and maybe it's because a rebel archetype is very active for me. You know, I just have always had a little bit of a rebellious streak, but again, in a positive way. I kind of want to know what's going on. I'm a very curious person, and I will. If someone's following a rule that's just a rule and doesn't even make any sense, I'm going to want to rebel against that or figure out a better way, and find myself very resistant, right, to someone who says you should follow the law at all costs and not question it. The rebel's going to question everything, but questioning authority can be very helpful. Number 7 is the lover. The lover is the lover. The lover is here to experience divine connection. And the lover in the light archetype is here to really express unity consciousness. The lover is about connection with other more than connection with self. And so that archetype is about union in all forms. And the shadow of that, where that gets taken to a darker place, is what we call the shadow archetype of the abuser. So whereas the lover Your emotions and your feelings and your desires are safe with a lover. With abusers, those emotions and desires become unsafe. And one of the questions that came up from you guys for this particular class was, how do we reconcile that? How do we reconcile early childhood abuse, right? How do we find a way to integrate those experiences? And what I will tell you is this. I think child abuse, especially abuse before the age of 5, because that is to some extent more damaging to the root chakra and the psyche even than trauma after the age of 5. But all trauma, especially childhood before 18, is hugely traumatic. That is an energy that takes a long time and a lot of work to shift, transform, and transmute, but it is possible. And at the core of it, you have to decide. I mean, if you've been through that experience, I can't tell you how to navigate it. I've helped many, many people navigate it. I'm really fortunate. I didn't have extreme abuse as a child, but just almost everyone else I know and love has had that. And so I can tell you, having lived alongside people who have been doing this healing work for a very long time, there is a forgiveness piece and there is an integration piece, recognizing and having compassion for the fact that every archetype, every shadow archetype, has a light archetype that it's connected to. And what usually happens is most shadow archetypes begin in the light. Most abusers at one point embodied more of the lover archetype. It's hard to even imagine. Most cynics at one time, maybe not even in this lifetime, embodied or inhabited that innocent archetype. And through experience and through conditioning and through patterning and through their own psychic experiences and their connection with their hive, right, and all of the energies in your subconscious that you don't even know where they came from or what they're connected to, and past life experiences, all of a sudden they find themselves in these deep shadow archetypes. And they're destructive not just to you or someone who's on the receiving end of it, they're destructive to them too. And so one of the things I think is really important, number one, is to recognize that you are not that person's shadow. Here's where we really begin the healing process. If you have been on the receiving end of the victim archetype, projections of that, if you've been on the receiving end of projections of the abuser archetype, the number one place to begin, at least for right now with session 1, is recognizing and articulating. You might even want to say it out loud. I am not that archetype. That is not, I may have been on the receiving end of someone else's abuser archetype, but that does not mean that I am that archetype. And it's recognizing a psychic separation. Does that make sense to you? I feel like this is so important for some of you just to even hear. Recognizing, creating, and honoring a psychic separation from your experience of the projections of that shadow. Once you are able to separate from it, you can analyze it, you can understand it better, and then when you integrate your experiences and your archetypes, because in many cases we're talking about someone else's abuser archetype. Now, if the abuser archetype is active for you, that's a different process. You're going to have to integrate that within yourself and find your way back to the lighter aspect of that archetype, recognizing that maybe that is in you, but are there ways to take that energy and make it productive for you instead? Do I think people can fundamentally change who they are? To a certain extent, I do. Because spiritual development, what I have learned is, it can result in a complete transformation and shape-shifting of people to a place where they're almost unrecognizable, sometimes in beautiful ways. So I do hold space for complete and spontaneous miracles in terms of people's broader psychological development and their spiritual development. I do. But I also think it's really about acknowledging, if you have been on the receiving end of projection, that you are not that projection. That just because someone projected onto you, they didn't turn you into that. So if you've been abused, the number one step, I think, and where to begin with shadow work is to recognize that even just saying, I'm abused or I've been abused, separate the language there. You are not the abuse, right? You are not worthy of abuse. You are someone who experienced that at one time. You received a projection of a shadow in the form maybe of a terrible physical experience. But you did not deserve that, and that is not who you are. And so this work, what I want to tell you if you've been a victim, is recognizing that something is in your line, creating that psychic distance and then reintegrating that from a healed place is the answer to everything. It's the answer to everything. When you hear people say, I have compassion for the person who harmed me, and you look and say, how could you even have that compassion? Having worked with thousands of people now, I can see where someone can finally say at the end of a long process, what happened to me was not acceptable, and I am not that abuse, and I did not deserve that. But I can hold a space of compassion for how much that person was hurting when they projected that shadow onto me in unacceptable ways. And it doesn't mean you have to forgive them even, but you can, holding a space of compassion, that compassion is for you. That compassion is not for that other person. That compassion is a gift for you, because guess what? The resentment that you feel, which is part of your shadow, that anger that you feel, that desire for revenge that you feel every time you think about that experience. And maybe you already know this. Every time those feelings come up, they start to anchor in your body. Maybe it shows up as back pain. Maybe it shows up as IBS. Maybe it shows up as something with your thyroid, which is all about whether or not you're able to speak your truth, right? You don't want to hold on to these emotions until they manifest in your body as disease. One of the worst things I think that can happen to a human being is that they're on the receiving end of a projection, which leaves them with all these emotions. They don't understand where the emotions are coming from or how harmful they are. They never learn how to work with, integrate, and transmute them, find a way to make them useful, in other words. And then ultimately those feelings crystallize and harden in the body as disease. And the person ostensibly dies from whatever the disease was, but the root cause of that disease was their inability to find a way to work through these issues. That to me is the ultimate tragedy of the human experience. And that's why I'm here trying to share this with you, because it's not easy what we're talking about, but it's also not avoidable unless you just want to live, in some fairy tale land of your own making and never really, explore the issues to the extent necessary to really create meaningful transformation in your life. I think you're here for that, or you wouldn't be taking this class. So that's why I'm sharing all of this with you. Okay, so we've talked about lover and abuser. There's the creator archetype, right? The manifester, the one who's here to build, the one who's here to expand, the one who's here to facilitate, right? Growth for other people. The shadow side of that is the destroyer, the one who's here to undermine structures. It's very similar. Some of these have nuances that are very connected, sort of like the orphan and the victim to a certain extent, or the explorer and the sheltered soul, right? But the creator is specifically an archetype that's designed to bring new things and ideas into being. Think of entrepreneurs, and think of innovators and people who are here to just have new ideas. And the destroyers are the ones who are constantly pointing out the reasons why those things won't work. We don't need that. It doesn't make sense. It's too expensive. Why would you? That's not an interesting idea. Just undermining. And again, we have people a lot of times in parental relationships. You'll have this growing up. You'll be innovative. You'll have that creator soul, and then somebody is always there to say, nope, not interesting, not worthwhile. Nobody's going to want that. And that's how you end up with somebody at the end of their life. This is where this becomes sad, where they think, I never tried. You know what I mean? Like, I had all these ideas and all this potential, and every time I turned around, somebody, one of these people was telling me, that's not good, or you shouldn't do that, or you should try something else. And so that's how that duo manifests. There is the jester profile, right? Lighthearted and here to see the easier, lighter side of life. That's an archetype that's really about understanding that there's a divine wisdom and there's a divine humor in the universe, right? And so this is the jester archetype is more than just someone who makes you laugh. It's someone who brings a lighter perspective to your entire life, and you can imagine what the shadow of that looks like. The jester taken to a shadow place is the trickster. The trickster is the jester who does harm, right? The trickster is the jester who might think it's funny to trip you, right? And all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, that's funny to them, but can be destructive to you. So someone who seems to have sort of the jester persona or the jester archetype But if they take it to a shadow place with negative intention, they can devolve to the trickster very quickly. The jester archetype says the joke's on them. They're self-deprecating. The trickster archetype says joke's on you. And I'm sure you know people like that. Okay, the number 10 archetype for Jung was the ruler. This is the sovereign. This is the king and the queen. This is the elevated leadership. This is the, the conscious leadership. This is the one who has divine right authority. This is the one who moves through life with almost an automatic sense of authority and power. Very grounded, very, like I said, sovereign, very understanding of their own needs and desires, and able to carry themselves in a way that communicates their authority not only to themselves but to other people as well. And then the shadow archetype of that is the dictator, right? The ruler thinks about the greater good of all. The dictator thinks about the greater good of one. And that can be seriously dangerous. Imagine being, again, I always try to use the family as an example, but you can even look, in political and social circles to see examples of this. But, someone who has the desire to be a good leader in a family, right, is thinking about the greater good of the whole. What does everybody need? Not just what does dad need? What does everybody need? Not just what mom needs, right? And so the ruler is looking at the greater good of the entire community, the entire collective. The dictator is saying, what's in it for me? The ultimate outcome has to be this. How do I get there? How do I convince all these other people that this is what needs to happen? And you can imagine what the projection of the dictator looks like, because the dictator wants to win at all costs. Someone who wants to win at any cost is a very dangerous person. And so if the goal of relationship with you, if you're on the receiving end or the projecting end of that archetype, is win at any cost, they're going to win, that means you may lose at any cost. And so being on the other receiving end of that shadow is very scary. The magician archetype, remember from the major arcana, he's got all his tools. The magician archetype is another manifestation archetype. In our typology, it's in the West, because the magician knows how to use intuition, and intuition lives in the West. The magician uses all of his tools, but recognizes that his or her most important magical tool is the mind. Think of the Hermetic principles, right? First Hermetic principle is mentalism. Everything is mental, all is mind. And then the shadow archetype of that is the sorcerer. And that would be an archetype that we would associate with dark magic. And isn't that an interesting concept in our circles, right? In metaphysical circles, where a lot of times people are afraid of the work that we do because it has negative connotations. And so, if you have been on the receiving end, the projecting end of that sorcerer archetype, then you know that can be very scary. The sorcerer would be associated with psychic attack, right? And someone who uses the gifts of the magician with poor intent, with the intent to cause harm. And like I said, all of these shadow archetypes can be very dangerous. They can be mentally dangerous, they can be physically dangerous, and that's why it's important to look at all of these archetypes and really unpack them and be willing to face the reality of what they represent. And then the last archetype from Jung is the sage. This is the archetype of deep wisdom, can even be spiritual wisdom, very grounded, earthy wisdom. The sage is interested in the spirit of the law. This is another one that likes loose interpretation, likes to leave space for interpretation, understands that wisdom is relative. The sage understands that there are lots of different perspectives and all are accurate, right? So no judgment in the sage archetype. The dark face of that, or the shadow face of that archetype, is the judge. So whereas the sage would never judge anyone, right, because the sage recognizes everything is relative and you can't really make assumptions about people's experiences or desires, the judge is going to say nothing is relative, it's all black and white. There's a right and a wrong, and if you're on the receiving end of that projection, the judge will say, and you're wrong. And a lot of times the judge shadow archetype doesn't have their facts in order. One of my favorite teachers used to tell me, never make a decision unless you have your facts straight. And not just your facts, but the facts of everyone else who's involved in the situation, which usually means you got to take your time. The sage recognizes that. You should never make a decision or an assumption based on anything other than an absolute control of the facts. The judge is going to say, you know what, the facts are what I think they are. And so I'm going to use those facts by which to judge you and decide that you are wrong. And so it's a jury of one with that judge shadow archetype, and you can see how that could be dangerous as well. Okay, so a lot of times, like I said, hold space for that, especially as we go into the typologies in our next session. The fact that someone who in your life, or it could even be you, who's really activating one of those shadow archetypes may not always have been in that space, and you have to hold space too that they can return. You know, if you look at my notes are so scribbly, but just to show you as an example, you know, you start with the light archetype and you move to that shadow archetype, you can always move back across. It's not a linear A to B. It can be A to B to A. And so someone who is struggling, living in the shadow, you know, land of that archetype can move into healed space and return. The innocent who's become the cynic, if you can hold compassionate space for them for a second, could regain their innocence. And wouldn't that be a beautiful thing? If they could go back to that sort of childlike sense of wonder and curiosity, if they could shed. And some of you recognize that if you have some of these shadows. I do, right? Can you see where you have had some of these shadows, right? Your control issues, your anger issues. It's possible for you to heal and to make your way back on that spectrum toward the light. And then once you recognize what the light, because you have to, if you've been in the shadow for a long time, you have to go back and really dance with the light for a little bit to reintroduce yourself to it. And then you can come back to that balance, right? And then what happens over time is, if you go back to that nurturer, caregiver archetype, and you start to see yourself inching toward the dark mother, right? You're becoming angry, you're becoming frustrated, you start yelling, you know what I mean? You're not thinking about the collective good, you're thinking about your own will. You can go back and start to tip the scale and go too far toward the caregiver, and then find your way back to balance, where you don't have to sacrifice yourself in order to heal. Do you know what I mean? And so one of the things I'm working on to give you over the course of this class are some really helpful mantras. What would be a mantra that you would say? I don't have these ready for you yet, but I'm working on them. We're just getting started, so I've got so much work ahead of both of us. But one of the things I want to give you is a mantra to help you work from the light to the shadow. And if you're in the shadow, I want to give you a mantra to help you reconnect with the light. Again, you're never going to go all the way to one side or the other, because that's not realistic. It's not realistic. But if you are in that dark mother space right now, we got to get you a little bit back toward the caregiver. If you're in that destroyer space right now, if you're going through your life with a torch and just burning things down, you're in the destroyer shadow right now. And we're going to have to get you back to a creative space. Does that make sense to you? If you are in the orphan, or in the victim, nobody wants me, everybody's rejected me, you know what I mean, I don't have anybody. We're going to have to get you slightly back to that orphan who says, I may be alone, but I'm not lonely. I may not have a lot of physical resources, but I'm surrounded by a spiritual community and spirit guides and a spirit hive that supports me in every way and every moment. You know what I mean? And so mantras, I think, and keywords can be really helpful ways to get you back on track. So some of your questions that I want to make sure I have responded to, I may have answered them, or some of them, and like I said, I'm not going to answer all of your questions in session 1. There's a reason it takes us until the end of December to get through all the work that we're doing. But with regard to marriage and relationships, I want to say a few things now, and then we can delve deeper into this as we go. When you are in relationship with a partner, in the form of marriage or whatever committed partnership you might be in. I don't privilege marriage as the best form of committed partnership, but whatever it looks like for you, you have your shadow, they have shadow too. And sometimes your shadows nest together, and sometimes your shadows are completely different. One of the things I want to encourage you to do as you're going through this class is make a little inventory as you go. Do it in your notebook. Make a little inventory. You could even do a split sheet, right? My shadow, his shadow, my shadow, her shadow. And start to just jot down some keywords and some thoughts and ideas, just so that you can start to see where you overlap and where your shadows are distinct. The way to recognize where your partner's shadow might be is what your partner does that makes you upset. And I don't just mean irritated, I mean really upset, right? Shadow, usually when you're experiencing shadow, when your shadow's been activated, it's upset to the point of tears, right? It's upset to the point where you can't easily get your emotions under control. And so think about the last couple of times you felt that upset that's a good sign that those were experiences being triggered by shadow. And if those happened with your partner, it'll give you a good idea of what your partner's primary shadow archetypes are. And then you might want to think about where you have caused pain and suffering to other people too. You're going to have to look at that in this class. And I hate to tell you this if you're somebody who thinks you've never hurt anybody, but we all hurt people. I hope not intentionally. I certainly don't intend to hurt anybody, but there are times where I hurt other people's feelings, and I need to look at those. I always try to look at those and say, wow, I didn't intend to cause harm in that way, but I really hurt her feelings, or I really hurt his feelings, or I really annoyed her, or I really made him upset. And I need to look at that, and I need to own that, and I need to understand which one of my shadow archetypes emerged there. And then here's the other thing. It has to find an anchor in the other person in order to be activated. It's a dance, okay? So my shadow gets activated, I trigger your shadow, which gets activated, which in turn can go back and trigger my shadow, which gets activated, and one of you is going to have to stop the pattern, especially if you've been together for a long time. My husband and I used to have shadow wars. I'd trigger his, he'd trigger mine, I should trigger his, he'd trigger mine. Then for a while, I think we even did it intentionally, like, look, you're going to do that, I'm going to do this. Like, you're 5. I mean, what is that? At a certain point, I remember thinking to myself, what are we even doing? And I'm participating. You know what I mean? I'm human, but I wasn't trying to hurt him, but it was just like, you get triggered, and it's like, well, then I'm going to trigger you, and you're going to trigger me, and I'm going to trigger you. And you see it happen. You see it happen online, or people will comment on something, and I'll comment right back, and comment right back, and comment right back. And it's like, who's going to knock that off? Who's going to break that pattern? You're here taking this class because you've pretty much had enough of it. And whether you're seeing it in your relationships, or you're seeing it at work, or you're seeing it in your family, or whatever it is, you may well have to be the one who's going to break that pattern. But you know what? Be the one. It doesn't matter how you get to healed space. You just got to get there. And if it means that you have to be the bigger person to say, you know what? I'm not playing that game anymore. You're going to try and trigger me? I won't be triggerable. And you're going to try and trigger me again, and I won't be triggerable. And eventually this person starts to go, and then people say, gosh, your relationship, is so good. It seems like you guys have really figured each other out. And it's like, you know what? You know how we figured each other out? Because one day I said no. One day I said, I'm going to be the bigger person here, and you're not going to do this to me anymore, because I recognize what's happening to me. I can't fix you, but I can fix me. And I can recognize that when you say whatever that is, or you do whatever that is for the 900th time, I don't have to react. I have the right not to react. And in fact, when I don't react, it will hold up a more direct mirror for the other person to say, whoa, I can't believe that's what I was doing, without even having to have the conversation. Now, I will teach you the blue room meditation, which is a more active intervention, you know what I mean, where you can go into the blue room and actually dialogue with your partner, or dialogue with the higher selves. But I'll tell you, the minute you stop participating in bullshit seems to stop. As I posted, or I made a meme a couple weeks ago, I don't know if you saw it on social media, but it said, drama needs a host. Don't be a hostess. You know what I mean? You're not going to host that party. Sorry. And then what happens with drama is drama goes, hey, will you host my party? No? Okay, well, I'm just going to go over here now. So you have a choice to make. We will continue talking about marriage. I think marriage is where the rubber hits the road when it comes to shadow work, because it's one thing for you to do your own work. It's another thing for your partner to see you becoming more sovereign and in control of your emotions, both your conscious emotions and your subconscious emotions. How do you transmute shadow? We are going to be working on this throughout the 6 months. Ultimately, the key to transmutation is recognition. When you know better, you do better. Becoming aware. We've talked a lot about outbursts, for example. Outbursts, what did I want to say about outbursts, by the way? Here's what I want to say about it. You do not want to project while you're processing, okay? So again, awareness is the key here. Once you recognize that you're being triggered, okay? And it's usually because you start to feel like you have irrational emotions. You feel irrationally angry. You feel irrationally hostile. You feel irrationally sad, right? They're irrational emotions a lot of times that get triggered by the shadow realm. You have to be strong enough, and you will be by the time the course is done, to say, this is happening, and I have to process this. I'm going to be really conscious of not projecting my own shadow while I'm processing it. Because usually what happens is when it gets triggered, it's an automatic projection. The emotion, the shadow emotion gets triggered. Oh shit, I don't want to look at this. This is too hard. Let me spew it onto you. Oh, the emotion gets triggered. Your jealousy gets triggered. Oh wait, I'm gonna say, something's bad about you. Oh, my, sadness got triggered. Well, I'm gonna say you made me sad. Which, what that does is completely make you not responsible, right? It means that you don't have any work to do. It's like, well, I'm feeling this, I'm just going to give it to you. This came up, I'm just going to throw it. You don't get to do this. The feeling comes up, and now what you're going to have to do is sit with it. Ooh, my jealousy got triggered. Okay, I'm not going to say something mean about the person who's making me jealous, because that would be, indulging my shadow. So what I'm going to do instead is really ask myself, what am I jealous of? What am I jealous of? Am I jealous of what they have? Am I jealous of who they are? And then you have to start to dialogue with that shadow and ask it some very mature questions coming from the light, which is, do you really know everything there is to know about that person? What if you're jealous of someone and there's something in their life that you absolutely would not be jealous of? Do you really want to walk a mile in their shoes? Would you really trade your life for theirs? You know what I mean? Like, asking yourself the light questions when it comes to this work are almost maternal in a way, and they slow you down and ask you to really analyze the situation. Why are you jealous? When you think about this emotion, give me some symbols, give me some words to describe it. What is it that you wish you had? What's underneath that desire? Is that really the thing you want, or does it represent something much bigger for you? Have you always felt this jealousy, or is it coming up at a certain stage in your life? Are there other things triggering this? Usually the shadow emotion is the surface level emotion. It's the top of a much bigger iceberg. Okay? So rarely are you so upset because you're jealous of someone, or rarely are you so upset because of something someone said. Rarely are you so upset because of the trigger. It's usually because the trigger is up here, and down underneath it is 20 years, 30 years, 40 years of emotions that somehow have a synchronicity there, somehow have a resonance there. But what's underneath that iceberg is so much bigger. It goes back, that little bit of jealousy over some, random thing now could really be around not feeling loved or taken care of by a parent. Or it could really be coming from feeling, a lack of something much bigger in your early childhood. Do you know what I mean? And so if you don't project while you process, you give yourself the space to process without hurting other people, which is part of the ethics of shadow work. And then through the journal questions that I'm going to be giving you, through the debrief that we have, through the tools that you're going to receive over the next 6 months, through the meditations, you're going to have a structure and some processes to go through to remind yourself. It's almost like stop, drop, and roll, right? Stop, drop, and reflect. Process, don't project, and allow yourself the space to heal. Allow yourself the space to sit with the questions, and allow yourself the time to figure out not just what the trigger is. The trigger is a symptom. You need to look at the whole iceberg and get to the cause, not the symptom, because the symptom usually has nothing to do with the cause, or is only partially related to it. We've talked about the inner child and child abuse. Your inner child is the reason you're doing this work. Your inner child is in so many ways free of these shadow experiences and these shadow emotions, and wants the complete liberation from them. If you think about what a child represents, it's purity, it's pure consciousness, and it's the absence of fear. Children, we always think about how joyful and curious and fearless they are. They don't walk around going, well, should I do that? I shouldn't do that. They just run and do. We have conditioned ourselves into fear, and part of that fear is based on the fact that we have run into other people's shadows and been on the receiving end of those projections. By the end of these 6 months, you're going to have sent all those projections back to the people who cast them upon you with love. And that inner child in you, I'm gonna cry, that inner child in you is going to be free once and for all. Because that inner child is not a reflection of all of those projections all those years. Your inner child is pure and beautiful. Your inner child is still within you. Your inner child can be healed. And once that inner child gets its integrity back, right? Once that inner child is really able to see that you you, right? Your higher best self is going through, and it's like pulling off barnacles and layers and really allowing that inner child to emerge once again back to that original archetype, that innocent archetype, and trusting that their innocence is safe now. And they're not going, next time someone projects onto them, because someone will project onto you again, it will happen, probably by the end of the day today, you're going to be a little more Teflon coated. You know what I mean? We got to Teflon you up a little bit. So those projections come and and the way you Teflon coat is you process. In the moment, stuff is happening, process. Your little notebook, whether it's this or whatever you decide to use, by the way, I just got mine today because they just came in, so I'm transferring all of my notes from my big notebook into my little cute notebook, so I'll have the same one you do. You need to process. When an emotion comes up, instead of just pushing it back in the suitcase and ignoring it or moving on, or I'll think about it later, or I'm not going to cry right now, you're going to have to learn how to process your emotions, and I'm going to teach you. And we're going to learn to process in a lot of different ways. I'm also going to teach you how to quantum process, which means allowing your spirit guides to process on your behalf. And that's how you do more spontaneous processing, and that's how you heal more quickly, and we'll talk about quantum healing as well. So I think I have uncovered a lot of answers to your questions. How do you identify the shadow? Shadow identification, I wanted to say something to you about this, by the way. Let me just see if I can find my notes to you really quick. If I can't, I will bring it up to you or with you the next time. Okay, how do you discover your shadow? This is where Myers-Briggs comes in, and this is where we are going to start right at the beginning of the next session. You discern your shadow by thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuiting. Those are 4 different modalities highlighted by the Myers-Briggs type inventory. So if you're a T, an F, an S, or an I, and I want you to go back to your type, make sure you have finished the Myers-Briggs inventory test before session 2, because it won't make any sense to you if you don't know what your Myers-Briggs type is. So make sure you do that. Once you know what your type is, if you have a T, that means you think, you intellectualize your shadow. Your shadow comes up in your thoughts. My husband's an INTJ, and he thinks the shit out of his shadow. Okay, his shadow comes up in thoughts at night, racing thoughts. Can't sleep because the thoughts, right? If you're a feeling person, right? If you have F, which I do, your shadow comes up in how you feel. It's more of a sensory experience. It's like you feel stressed, you feel sad, you feel anxious, you feel angry. You're not thinking thoughts necessarily. Like, I don't have racing angry thoughts, but sometimes I will feel angry. If you have S in your profile, you sense, and you use all of your senses. You hear shadow. Shadow comes up sometimes for you as a physical trigger when you touch something. All of your shadow experiences are sensory. If you have I in your profile, I is the intuit. I'm sorry, N in your profile for intuiting, which I do. I'm an INFJ. You intuit. Your intuition brings your shadow. You start to sense a shadow in somebody else. Maybe you haven't even heard them say anything or had a physical experience with them, but you sense it around them, right? Your intuition, not with physical senses, but with your intuitive sense. People who are sensing, by the way, it's all of your senses other than your intuition. It's your hearing, it's your taste, it's the ability to see, it's the ability to touch. If you have an N in your profile, you discern the shadow through your own, your third sight, through your intuition. Okay. I hope that this has been a really fun introduction. We went a little bit over time. We actually went almost to 2 hours tonight. Most of our classes will be 90 minutes. Next time, like I said, we're going to pick up right with the Myers-Briggs inventory. We're going to integrate your astrological profile there as well. We're going to weave in the elements from the medicine wheel, and ultimately you're going to end up with a quadrant type. And like I said, we're building beautiful PDFs for you to show you exactly what your quadrant analysis is. We are restocking your tools shortly, and so if you missed the tools for this second class, which includes your grid and then your crystals and your mist for your quadrant, make sure that you get those tools. They'll be in the shop for you. If you only signed up for session 1, you need to sign up for session 2, and we'll make sure that you can do that as well. Session 2, like I said, is going to be a gangbuster because it's going to combine everything I just taught you tonight, because I set the stage tonight, and fully explain to you how all of the other pieces of this model come together. Aho, and on we go. Cheers, everybody. I cannot wait to continue this journey with you. I'll look forward to seeing you soon in the Facebook group and also for our live debrief. In the meantime, take care. Solstice blessings to you. I'll see you soon.